Testing, testing. Can you guys hear me right now? Dan G said no audio. Just want to make sure you guys can hear me all right. Might have just been that Dan said that before I started talking. Just want to make sure. Okay, good. All right, you guys can hear me now. All right. So yeah, like I said, we'll be starting here in... And then, there we go.
Okay, so right click here.
There we go. All right, sorry guys. I think we got it working now. Those of you guys can hear me. Drew, yeah. You're right, Drew. It's going to be a pantomime presentation tonight. You guys will just see me act out in interpretive dance what tonight's lesson is. And that should be just enough for you guys. That's the point of tonight. You don't need audio and talking. All you need is movement. Ranbir says, I'm the Verizon guy. I don't know what that means. I hope it's a compliment. I'm assuming the Verizon guy is just some sort of hunk that I look like. So I hope that's what you mean by that, Ranbir. Can you hear me now? Okay, I get it. Yeah. That was like 20 years ago, Ranbir. I don't even know if most of the people listening would even get that reference. Drew said, I tried to get by in university with interpretive dance, didn't go well. Yeah, I was actually a drama kid. I think I told you guys in one of my last presentations. So we actually did interpretive dances in theater arts, and we did presentations for them at the in the weekly school assemblies. And some of them were fun, but most of the time they were completely ridiculous. And I'm surprised how I was even considered a popular kid in high school, considering what I did in those dances. But it happens. All right, so we're at 8:05 now. We got what dozen you guys watching, so why don't we get started? So tonight's lesson is on the art of movement. I didn't call it body language, and the reason why I didn't call it body language is because body language is something that you really need to be, like it's something we teach in our boot camps, and it's something we teach one-on-one, and it's kind of the only way that you can learn it. So I didn't want to try to teach body language over the course of a webinar because it would be very, very difficult. And I wanted to get into more the theory of body language, which is why I called this the art of movement. So it's less, there is some practical stuff, and I'm going to go over some practical stuff, and obviously you guys are going to get, I hope anyway, you'll get a lot of takeaways from this presentation in terms of actionable things that you can do with regards to body language, but I am going to get more into the theory of it tonight. And we do have another product called Beyond Words that myself, Versetti, Daniel Versetti, who hopefully you guys have been seeing some of his webinars we've been putting out for free recently. And if not, definitely check those out. Myself, Daniel Versetti, and then Mr. M, who's an older instructor, kind of produced the thing and helped with the content. But it's a DVD home study course. And we actually just reduced the price a couple, I think, weeks ago to $99. It used to be like $300. It's a great deal. It's literally like 8 or 9 hours of body language training. That's, although I just said that it's hard to teach body language over video, it does have a lot of exercises in it. And we did have a live studio audience, as you could say, during that DVD. So there is a lot of stuff you can see where we do exercises. Versetti is a classically trained Shakespearean actor. So he does a lot of exercises and things that he learned in drama school and taking theater and whatnot. And it's great. Like I said, 8-9 hours of stuff on there. So if you are interested in body language, we do have a whole separate course that will get into a hell of a lot more detail that I could possibly get into in the hour-long presentation module we'll be doing tonight. But just a heads up. So what else do I want to talk about before we get started? Great, I know this is a broken record here, but great stuff going on in the Facebook group. I'm seeing a lot of you guys obviously putting down your homework. You guys are sharing and helping each other. That's great to see. We're going to try to jump in. We have been as much as we can. And feel free to call us out too, guys. I know you guys, some of you guys are doing that already. But I love it when, guys are like, Derek, what did you mean when you talked about being in state or having presence or what have you? Because sometimes I feel it's hard sometimes as a teacher because, especially when I've been teaching this for so long, sometimes I forget the pieces of things that I teach that maybe are more complex than the way that I'm teaching them would communicate. And I assume everyone's getting it and they're all 100% on board with what I'm saying, and I know that sometimes that's not the case. So when you guys can, say, hey, when you're talking about being in state and you said that you had to control your emotion or what have you, I really like if you get more into depth into exercises you can do to help do that, whatever. And to me, like, I have so much information to give that don't ever worry about, pressing me on something thinking that, oh, I'm being a bit too, anal about this topic or something. Because believe me, if you're asking a question, I guarantee you it's not only a question I've asked a million times to myself, but I've also answered it a million times, and I've also thought really hard about the ways in which I teach things and how to make it easier. So I have lots of examples. So yes, please, if you guys do have questions about any of the content, whether it's me or Chris, or George is posting a lot on there too, please feel free to ask us to get into more detail if need be. Great. Okay, so let's get into the actual module. We're almost 10 past now, so let's jump into it. All right, so Module 7, the art of movement. Actually, I think this is Module 8. Sorry, guys, I might have made a mistake. I keep forgetting that Chris has modules that go after mine. So I believe this is Module 8. So sorry if some of you are thinking that maybe you missed one or we're going backwards. That's a mistake on my part. Sorry about that. But the art of movement, like I said, we're going to get in more into the theory tonight. So let's jump right into it. So again, I started off with a quote, which I'm sure most of you guys, if not all of you, I would assume recognize the person. The greatest education in the world is watching the masters at work. And it's, of course, Michael Jackson. Now, I put this up here for a number of reasons. One, when it comes to body language, the way that I learned it is by watching other people. And, I already mentioned, obviously, taking a boot camp or getting one-on-one training with someone is the easiest way to do that. But you can also learn a lot, as you'll see throughout the rest of my presentation here, from studying examples of people that were really, really good with body language. Now, I use Michael Jackson here not because the quote is very applicable, but also because I actually used him, believe it or not, as an example of good body language. And it may not be in the way that you think. Michael Jackson is, so there's this video, and I didn't put this in the homework, but I want you guys to check out this video. It's the 25th anniversary of Motown. It was 83, maybe 82, early 80s. And Michael Jackson, for the first time, he performs at this event. And it's the first time that he performs the moonwalk. And before this time, Michael Jackson, of course, if you know the history of the Michael Jackson and the Jackson 5, Michael Jackson was already super popular. He was a child star from the Jackson 5, and it was a huge hit then. Then when he transitioned into a solo career, there was a bit of a transition there. To go from a child star to an adult star is always, there's a bit of a transition there. His first album, Off the Wall, he was a late teen, I think maybe 17, 18, 19 years old. Very disco-heavy album, mostly just, I think half the album, side A is like disco songs, and then side B is kind of like love songs. And you start to see a little bit of the future Michael Jackson, the adult Michael Jackson. But it wasn't until this video, the 25th anniversary Motown Awards, that you actually got to see for the first time Michael Jackson in his sort of adult form. And not only was it the first time that people saw this, but it was the first time that he did a lot of things. It was the first time he had a really well thought out, coherent dance component to a lot of his music. Now that's not to say he didn't when he was with Jackson 5. Of course he did. But this is very different. This wasn't just choreographed like boy band stuff necessarily. This was very sexualized. And it's interesting to see the effect that it had. It was the first time he did the moonwalk too, by the way. And this was like really solidified Michael Jackson as the basically, I always say, the high watermark of what body language can achieve. Because if you watch this video, you can hear women in the audience literally almost having an orgasm as they're watching him do all these dance moves. And they're very sexualized, like I said. You know, this is all the classic MJ moves were basically premiered in this event. The crotch grab, like I said, the moonwalk, the spin, the sultry look he gives, where he's like kind of like aggressively singing with that sort of restraint that he has. The soft voice, but then hits those peaks and those high crescendos at the most most important moments. And you can see the effect it has on the audience. Almost, within a minute, everyone's up on their feet. The women, the guys, everybody. And it's really, I think, one of the best examples of a performance I've ever seen. And the reason I bring that up is because Michael Jackson was a perfectionist. Again, with the quote that I used, he really nailed down exactly the way to move to get the biggest response that you could get. And I'm going to get into this a bit later in terms of how that kind of applies with body language. And I think, I mentioned in the previous module that I did about how charm and attraction is very much an emotional game. But preparation and I guess you could call muscle memory of movements is a very important factor there. It's not to say you should be totally conscious when you're moving and the movements and the effect your movements have. In fact, I would say the opposite. But it does pay to study that and to notice it and to know the effect that it gets. I think that Michael Jackson may not be the best example because I think he was very fine-tuned, in fact, too fine-tuned, in that he was such a perfectionist that he could do that and get the effect. Most people can't. They get, it's too logical. And there is a certain value in getting lost in the movement, lost in the moment, which I'll get into later. But anyway, watch 25th Anniversary Motown Awards. Great example. All right, so let's go back here. Okay, how to move. I got a picture of Paul Newman here, a very young Paul Newman on the left. He's a great guy to look at in terms of body language, especially his older movies, but even into his later years. The Color of Money and a lot of his movies when he was even a bit old. I probably not when he was really old, but certainly up until the 80s, he plays a very similar character. A Cool Hand Luke is another one, although he's, I guess, still considered young in that one. This one, I'm not even sure which movie this is from. Maybe The Hustler or something, which was the prequel to The Color of Money. But the idea here, the reason why I use this is not only Paul Newman a great example of someone to look at for body language and confident sort of demeanor and his charisma and stuff. I think he is one of the most charismatic actors of all time. But I also use this because his body language in this picture is very good. I'll get into this a bit more when we bring up the points here as to why. But just notice the way he's sitting, the way he's looking, and the look on his face, because that's going to get a bit more important later on. So, how to move is the topic of this first part. I put be comfortable here. The idea behind that is that in any situation, you should be the most comfortable person in the room. And I mean, sometimes it's in the room, sometimes it's within your group, whatever. But the idea here is to be comfortable. Now, the question is, well, how do you be more comfortable? What do you do to be more comfortable? We used to teach, several things, and we still teach them, things you can do. So the first thing is, we used to call it locking in. But the idea behind this is that you want to make yourself more comfortable when you're in a group. And the way you can do this is by leaning on things, sitting down, relaxing yourself. If there's nothing to lean on, then you put your weight on your back foot. And there's a couple other things you can do, which I'll get into later. But for now, the idea is that you want to be comfortable. So if you can sit, you should sit. If you can lean, you should lean. If you can't lean, you should relax. put your weight on your back foot, and be comfortable. You should have a smile on your face, and you should look like you don't. And this is, again, probably going back to things I've said in previous modules. The look of complete, what is it? Like you do not want or need anything. You're just completely happy. Take up room. So this is, again, the other reason I show this picture. You can usually tell confident people in a room, let's say if you're all in the room sitting down, you can tell the confident guys from the not so confident guys just by looking at the way that they sit. And it has to do with how much room you take up. There's a lot of I guess theory behind this in terms of why it communicates that. I mean, part of it is that you just look relaxed. There's other theories that say, and evolutionarily we've been most of our existence has been in tribes, 50-person tribes, and the person that can sit comfortably with his arms not guarding his organs is the guy that's not scared that someone's going to throw a spear at him or something. I don't know how much effect that really has on anything, but the idea here is that you just take up room. So if you're sitting down, it means your legs are spaced out, it means your arms are draped across the back of the chair, you're leaning back, you got a smile on your face, you're comfortable and content in your environment. Very similar to the way that Paul Newman looks right here. And if you looked at him in a room of other people and everyone else was sitting with their legs together, with their shoulders scrunched up, with leaning forward, you would automatically, just by glancing, know that he is not only the most comfortable person in the room, but probably the leader, the most confident, and the most likely to be the guy that if you're a woman, you'd want to talk to. And so that's the reason why. But you can do this with anything. You don't need to be sitting to do this. You can lean. You can even lean on your back foot, like I mentioned. Be fluid. So I got this concept from Bruce Lee, which I've used a couple of Bruce Lee quotes throughout the course of these modules. And the idea behind this is that he used to say, "Be like water," and the idea behind that was that water can move. It's sort of like not only is it completely fluid and non-constrictive, it can take any shape or form, and it has a tremendous amount of force behind it if it needs to. But when I'm talking about be fluid, I used to say like move as if you're moving underwater. The idea behind that is not that you should be moving as if you're actually underwater, but the idea is that the resistance that water would create should be the speed at which you move. And I'll get more into that a bit later when I talk about slowing down, but the idea behind this is that every movement you have and you make should have a fluidity to it. Not sharp, kind of aggressive moves. They should be fluid, almost as if you are taking the time to enjoy the movement itself and sort of putting more thought and more feeling into the movement as you make it. Again, I'll get into this more a bit later, but the idea here is that it should be fluid, smooth. And the last one here is smile and pause. Now there's a couple things you can do here. The big idea behind this is less is more. The smallest kind of reaction you can give to things is often the best reaction. And I'll do this a lot of the time in terms of my body language. Let's say when women ask me a question, or they compliment me, or even if they insult me, let's say, if they're giving me a little bit of a test and they say something like, "Oh, is that something you say to all the girls?" Or, "Yeah, wow, you got some great moves tonight. Are you just talking to ladies tonight and trying to get laid?" Or whatever they say, it doesn't matter. I'm a short guy, so often they say, another one they usually say is, "Geez, you're really short. Does this work for you?" If they're being particularly mean. And the idea behind that is you want to smile and pause. Is sort of the thing is you don't necessarily respond right away. You smile and look at them almost as if like you're impressed that they asked that or said that. As if you see behind it. So if they're asking you a question, if they're trying to keep the conversation going, if they're complimenting you, or even if they're teasing you, you smile and acknowledge it, that you know what they're doing. And for the record, what they're doing is they're flirting with you. So that's how you see it. You smile and you pause and you literally give the exact same face expression that Paul Newman is giving in that picture. That's what we call, it's not a forced smile, it's a very what's the word? Essentially, it's a smile that communicates that you know what they're doing and you're above it, but you're also impressed by it. And again, that's why I chose that picture. I think that's a really great picture. You'll find me when girls ask me questions and they say things, and especially when they tease me, that's the exact look that I give them. And it partially communicates that I know what they're doing, partially communicates that it's not going to work on me, and partially communicates that I like them more for saying it. And if you can get all three of those working at the same time, just with your body language, that is that's very, very powerful. You'll often have women completely changing their idea about who you are in that second that you do that. And that's sort of the power of body language. The reason why I've always said, like, on my best nights out, when I've been literally having the best nights, and I'm sure you guys can probably have examples of this happening to you in the past as well. When you've had your best nights out, maybe you drank enough that you were just really outside of your comfort zone. Oftentimes when you think about it, was it really what you were saying? If you wrote down what you said that night, or you had a recorder, would you listen to it and be like, oh my God, that was the best stuff? Probably not. What it really was the body language. What it really was the nonverbals you were communicating that was getting women attracted. And that was one of the reasons that I chose to study body language so intently, was because I recognized that it really, they say, especially when they talk about first impressions, that body language is like 90% of communication. And I don't know if I agree with those numbers, or that you could even have an exact science that would be able to nail it down. But the truth is that it is the majority. And if you can control your body language and have that really set down, everything else becomes a lot easier. Some people are really good talkers. I'm a pretty good talker. I can talk. I can keep going forever. Some guys aren't. And I've seen guys that have amazing game that don't talk that much. And yet their body language is on point, and that's all that really matters, because they can do the rest of their communication. They have that sort of laconic kind of vibe to them that they can communicate all they need to with very subtle movements, subtle expressions, and subtle communications. And that's almost more powerful. All right, so let's keep going here. Okay, 45-degree angles. So this is something, I have an acting background, and I was taught this in theater and in film acting as well. The idea here is that 45-degree angles are basically standing so that your shoulders are at a 45-degree angle. And if you're in acting, you will steal scenes if you're at a 45-degree angle, because people's eyes are naturally wanting to go they're wanting to look at objects at a 45-degree angle, or people anyway. So I use a bunch of examples here of Greek gods and heroes carved in marble or stone, and you'll notice they're all at 45-degree angles. In fact, most of these, if you look up Greek statues, at least of people that are worthy of respect, you'll find that almost all of them are carved at 45-degree angles. And the idea behind that is that, the Greeks recognize that there is a certain, there is something with this body language with 45-degree angles that communicates masculinity, virility, confidence, and they use that in their carvings to communicate that. Now, not only will you see it all over the place in these classic statues, but like I said, from a theater background, if you're an extra, let's say, in a film, or even in theater or whatever. I remember I learned this when I was in theater in high school. I think I might have talked stories about my theater director in previous modules, but anyway, he was very good. But the idea was that I was in the background when I first started theater doing, I was in the chorus and stuff. And I remember at one point when I was in the chorus, I had switched to a 45-degree angle inadvertently. I just did it because whatever, I was comfortable doing it. And my theater director stopped what was going on. He said, "Derek, don't do a face your shoulders at a right angle to the audience." And I asked why, and he said, because if you do a 45-degree angle, everyone's eyes are immediately going to dart to you and think that you're someone of importance. And I have no lines in that scene, and I'm not someone of importance, so you shouldn't do that. And it's the same thing when I was in film school. If there's extras in the background, and you'll notice this too if they're in focus anyway, they don't want them to be at 45-degree angles, because automatically our eyes go to the person at 45-degree angles, and there's a respect that comes with that angle. So if you look at Here's some classic examples. If you start noticing this in movies, you see it all over the place. It's everywhere. Anytime there's a character that you're supposed to admire or respect, they'll almost always, in these quintessential scenes, be at 45-degree angles. And you'll notice this if you watch films. In fact, in a lot of ways, it can dictate who the person you should be looking at in a scene is, like I mentioned earlier. So obviously on the left here, you got Tyler Durden, middle James Bond, and on the right here you got Star-Lord, obviously a more recent example. But that's what it communicates, and these are all great examples of guys that have that sort of aspect to them, right? They're men of admiration, and they're also all kind of ladies' men in a way. Although Tyler Durden, I'm not sure if you call him a ladies' man, but the others certainly are. Now, what happens when you don't use 45-degree angles? What kind of communication gets established when someone, let's say, is facing straight on? Now, think about this too. Let's say when you've gone to talk to a girl, approach someone at work or in a social situation or at a bar, what does it communicate when you go at them like face on? So at a 0-degree angle, let's say. Well, here's some characters in movies that are operating at 0-degree angles. Notice a similarity between these characters if you recognize them from the films that they're in. It's fucking creepy, right? And these are all creepy characters. And you'll notice this too. Look at movies where characters are presented at this angle. They're almost always meant to be disrespected or not taken seriously, or they're supposed to be intimidating or creepy. That's the communication you're giving off, because it's supposed to be in your personal space, right? Especially ones that the low angle is featured here on I guess all of them, but especially a more of a low angle for the ones on the right here from Psycho and No Country for Old Men, where you're meant to feel less than the person. And certainly with Anthony Hopkins here as Hannibal Lecter, there's a little bit of a lower angle. I suppose meant to be taken at the viewing angle of Clarice as a point of view shot. It's unsettling. And this is why, when we tell guys, when you're talking to women, at least before they're facing you, always try to take a 45-degree angle or higher, right? So maybe not 90, because then you're just kind of looking over your shoulder at them, but certainly 45 degrees or more. And because that's going to communicate way more positive things than if you face them head on. If you face them head on, they're going to get creeped out, and it's the wrong sort of vibe. So, and by the way, start looking for this in movies. Notice, guys that you tend to like in movies, characters that you think like, oh, this guy's cool. Ask yourself why, and outside of what they're saying and how they're presented in scenes, look at their body language. What are they doing? Blocking is it's an art form, especially in theater, but also in film. And actors that are worth their salt use that to their advantage, and if not the actors, the directors do. So understand that all that, it doesn't happen by chance that you just happen to like that character. And dialogue plays less of a part than you may think in that decision that your brain makes, and has a lot more to do with the body language. So start paying attention to that in the films. Be deliberate. So again, we have Anthony Hopkins showing up here. Although I did use him in a bad example earlier with a very creepy character that he played, he is a great example of an actor that's very, very deliberate in his body language. And although I think most of his characters have he's known for having more of a sinister kind of vibe to his characters, which is not something I would advocate emulating as a personal trait. The one thing that is of respect when it regards to him is how purposeful he is and deliberate he is in his blocking, which is his movements on screen and on the stage. Probably more so than almost any other actor I've seen outside of Brando, which I'll get into later. But the thing with Hopkins is that he's actually, maybe I would say even more deliberate than Brando, because Brando improvised a lot, and Hopkins I don't think improvises at all. So there is more of a deliberation to his movements. So the first point I wanted to make was every movement has a purpose. Well, what does that mean? So think about movements you make, and think about movements that you make that don't have a purpose. What would they be? What is a movement with no purpose? So that would be a movement that has no goal, it has no meaning, it has no function. And if you're struggling to think of movements that have no function, the answer to this is normally, with most people, just sort of movements that are essentially you're nervous. So nervous tics. You have low self-esteem. So you're more scared of how you're coming across. So those are things like you twiddle your thumbs, you play with your hair, you shift your body weight from foot to foot, you look around, you avoid eye contact, and you have to ask yourself this question. And a lot of these, you can't control. They're subconscious. But if you're making a movement that has no purpose, why are you doing it? And usually the answer is because there is a purpose for it. And the purpose is to communicate your insecurity. And, when women do it, it's seen as a positive thing, at least from our perspective, because it means that if they're self-conscious about how they're coming across, it's usually because they like us, right? And that's the reason why we do it too. Is because we feel, maybe a bit inferior. We feel like we're on the spotlight. We feel like we don't want to, fuck it up. And so that makes us see our own movements. We become self-conscious of them. We see them through a lens and a spotlight, and it messes everything up. So it'd be easy for me to say, hey, stop doing that. And you probably already know that. That's not really going to help anyone because, like I said, it's all subconscious. But the idea here is that it's not about avoiding them. It's about making them deliberate. So if, let's say, you scratch your nose as a nervous tic, I'm gonna switch so you guys can see me here. So I'll give you guys an example of this. So let's say if you're talking to a girl. In fact, I don't have a cup here. If I did, I'd show you something. But I'm gonna pantomime a cup. So let's say, if you're talking to a girl and you guys are having a conversation, and you do something simple like taking a drink of your glass. Maybe you get a beer or whatever it is if you're in a bar. And normally that's not a way that you can communicate anything other than maybe you're nervous or you're an alcoholic or whatever. But normally if you're talking to them, and we'll just do a little scene here. So I'll say, oh wow, so your aunt's a nurse, huh? Yeah, that's crazy. My mom was actually a nurse for a little while when I was a kid, and blah 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 blah. Okay, so again, imagine I had a cup in that scene. Nothing really happened there. I just took a drink. Nothing was really communicated other than the fact that, my mom was a nurse as well. But if you make the movement deliberate and you slow it down and you hold eye contact and you pause a little, you can turn any movement into something a lot more. I'm going to get into this more when I talk about subtext, but I'll give you guys I'll do the same thing again, but I'll add those little things to it. So, same scene. So wow. So you're a nurse. Okay, cool. My mom was actually a nurse when I was a kid. Blah 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 blah. Okay. So when I do that the second time, and I slow it down, take a drink of my beer or whatever, as I'm looking them in the eyes, not saying anything, it communicates something. There's something being communicated there. And you can just do this with anything. So let's say, scratching your nose. Normally you're talking to a girl like, yeah, no, crazy. But the thing is like, blah, 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 I just, me and my friends are blah, blah, blah. It doesn't communicate anything. But when you slow it down and you start doing something like, yeah, it's crazy. Me and my friends, we actually just got here tonight and we're blah, 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 blah. It just adds another element to it, there's a whole other communication that's going on there. Body language is one of those things that I'm going to talk about this in the next module that I'm teaching. I'm going to talk about flirting and sexuality. There's a language that women communicate with that men are most of the time ignorant to. And again, I'll get into this in the next module, but just understand that when you can do these sorts of things, slowing it down and calling attention to it, you're communicating on a level that is predominantly a female sort of method of communication, and they'll pick up on it, and it creates it's basically flirting. So anyway, so keep this in mind. Be deliberate. Every movement has a purpose, whether it's scratching your nose because you just want to scratch your nose, or you're shifting your weight because it's more comfortable for you. But the way to make it more deliberate is slow it down. Okay, so what are you thinking as you move? So in that last example, when I was giving the taking the drink and scratching my nose, I was thinking something, and it's hard to give a really great performance of this when I'm doing it with you guys, because obviously it works a lot better when I have a girl on the other side. But the idea behind this is that I'm thinking normally sexual things, and it's not like specific necessarily, but it's more like this girl's really into me, and I know that, and we're gonna do bad things later. We're gonna do dirty things later, and if she can recognize that in my eyes, that actually gets communicated. Again, I'll talk more about this when I get into subtext, but that's the idea. If you can sort of load thoughts into your movements, that's the way to go about it. That's the way to do it. And yeah, it's super, super powerful. And less is more. So this is more about subtlety. It's, you don't want to overdo anything. The less you move, the less you react. I guess what I was really getting at when I wrote this one down is more has to do with reactions. So when women do something, let's say they try to insult you, or they try to get a reaction out of you, you give them the smallest, most sort of subtle reaction, as if to say that nothing really rocks you that much. You're someone that has that restraint. You only move as much as you need to, and you only react, at least you react in the way that is most beneficial to the situation and what you want, not because a girl is or someone is trying to elicit a reaction out of you. You see through that. So that's kind of what I'm getting at with that. Less is more. So if sometimes, and this is the example that I usually use, which is guys, if a girl says something, let's say a bit rude, she says like, "Oh, you're looking kind of lonely tonight. Are you just going and talking to girls, trying to find friends?" Some guys might be like, "Oh man, I need to react to that. I need to show her that was unacceptable." And so they, try to insult her back, or they react to it, and you're like, "Man, that's a really bitchy thing to say. Why would you say that?" Or like, "No, wait, I have so many friends here. You're acting like a, like a bitch saying that." And that's the complete wrong thing to do. The best thing you can do is react. In fact, the best thing you can do is simply give a look. Probably a similar look to the one Anthony Hopkins is giving in this picture. Maybe a bit more of a smile. You don't want that sinister, "I'm going to murder you for saying that" kind of look, which he's kind of giving here. Maybe a bit more of a smile, a bit more of a, impressed. Actually, the example I always give is like, you're the proud dad whose daughter just stood up to you in the way that you've been trying to teach her how to stand up to people since she was a kid, and you kind of respect that. That's kind of the vibe I like giving. That I'm impressed that she did it, and I like it. I like her more. I think I mentioned this in one of the previous modules. There was a great scene in, I think, the very first James Bond with Daniel Craig, which I believe was Casino Royale, maybe. Anyway, there was a scene when the evil spy, who's a female, kind of rejects him, and she kind of says like, "Oh, not today, Mr. Bond," and kind of walks away as if to say like, "Yeah, there's no way you're going to sleep with me." And he kind of looks at her with this look that kind of says like, can't win them all. But it also kind of says, "I like you more because you rejected me, because now you're a challenge, and I respect that." And that, when I saw that, I was like, man, that is exactly the kind of vibe with your body language you want to give when a girl is giving you some shit, or a girl is being a bit hard to get. Because it's a game. It's flirting. And that's kind of what they're trying to get. That's what they're looking for when they're doing those sorts of things. So just keep that in mind. So yeah, check out, I don't know what scene it is. I just know that I know it's Daniel Craig. I think maybe Eva Green or something plays the girl in it. But maybe watch the first. I know it's the first James Bond with Daniel Craig. Check that out if you can find that. Fitness and posture. So I'm gonna try to get Chris in here actually for a piece of this one as well, because although we're probably is equally out of shape, Chris has probably done more and put more thought into exercise and fitness than I certainly have. And I did obviously do some research into this and the stuff advice I'm going to give you guys about this. I put a picture of Arnold Schwarzenegger on here. Obviously a great example in terms of like confidence and an icon for not only fitness obviously, but also He's done a lot of stuff with self-help and confidence and going after what you want in business, and he really is a beacon for guys that are looking into getting into self-betterment. So I do recommend. There's a couple documentaries that have been made with him. I think Pumping Iron is one of them. There's another one that's more recent that is much more of a self-help vibe. It goes into the confidence and whatnot. That is very good to look into. So I'm just gonna we'll go through these points. Chris is actually here now, so he can jump in on these points when if he wants. I put up functional form. This is something actually I got from Chris, and I definitely agree with. And the point behind this, which kind of goes against the whole Arnold image here, is that women aren't necessarily interested in dudes that have a lot of muscle. What they're interested in is more of a functional strength. So it's not to say they're interested in guys for the sake that they're really muscly and have that sort of masculine form. They're more interested in guys because they take care of themselves and what that kind of translates into as to how it would be communicated in other parts of their personality. So the guy that takes care of his body is probably a guy that is a bit more, he's a bit more of a go-getter, goes after what he wants, takes care of himself, has a regiment to his life that would be, that has some positive correlations with someone that she'd be looking for, that is got his shit together, maybe has a good position with his job, or he's going after something he wants. When you're lazy and you're out of shape, all that really communicates is that you don't give a shit. And you can certainly be do very well as an out of shape guy, but it's much like fashion and the way you dress and the way you look. It is something that has an effect, and it's something that if you can take care of it and control it, you should control the controllables.
And the big thing I think that guys need to realize is that you don't have to be Arnold Schwarzenegger. You don't have to get there to see massive improvements in the way that women treat you and how attractive women find you. You don't have to be jacked like a bodybuilder to get a lot of attention from women. And you do get a lot of benefit out of a pretty moderate workout regime, or being somebody who plays hockey on a weekly basis, or plays soccer on a weekly basis, or plays tennis or any kind of sport. If you're doing that on a regular basis and you're eating healthy, you're going to look much more attractive, and you're going to be getting 80 to 90% of the gains, basically 80 to 90% of the attraction gains from 20 to 30% of the work. And then if you want to do more, then you can have the protein powders and do the bodybuilding regimen. But that's not necessary. And the reason why I emphasize this is because there's a lot of guys out there who are a little out of shape, and they think, well, it's not even really worth it unless I can get really good looking, unless I can get really in shape. And I want you guys to not put that big barrier up,
Yeah, I think the funny thing that I always like is Chris used to post about this quite a bit. He wrote some articles about how functional strength and functional form is so much better than these guys that go to the extreme degree of the bodybuilding and stuff. And these dudes on these bodybuilding forums used to get so butthurt by that comment.
Oh yeah.
And the funny thing is that, and this is the reason why when you talk to a lot of girls, there's a lot of women out there that see these dudes, these really built guys, and they're just kind of like, ugh, not my type at all. And you'll find a lot of them. And the reason being is the same reason you see women with the really big fake tits and the fake lips. It really communicates an insecurity when you're getting to that level of it, right? Unless you're a professional bodybuilder, where that's your passion and you're doing it for that, any reason outside of that is completely, I would say, vanity, which really communicates an insecurity. And I think women notice that, which is why they tend to see it as something that's negative as opposed to positive. So it is a spectrum. You can get into really good shape, and if any of you guys that are on Charisma Decoded that are in way better shape, you're like, fuck you, man, I spent so much time on this body. Look, dude, I'm not saying that it was a waste of time. What I am saying is there is a spectrum, and when you go past a certain point, it stops being about health and starts being about vanity. And women can tell that, which is sort of what we're getting at here.
And the number one thing is, I think, if you're a guy who is not in good shape, who doesn't work out, or maybe you like jog every once in a while or something like that, you can go to the gym 3 times a week for 3 months, and women will treat you differently, and you will notice that.
Yeah.
3 times a week for 3 months for a guy who's out of shape, 3 times a week for 3 months will make a big difference.
Yeah.
All right. Now you're gonna probably want to keep that up, But that will make a big difference for you guys, and that's where it starts.
So we'll get, there's a couple of the points here. I'm just going to throw them all up here. We can just talk about all of them.
And yeah, so the way that those 3 months start, because you're not going to look like, you're not going to look jacked after 3 months. But what's going to happen is you're going to carry yourself confidently. So the first thing that happens to you when you start hitting the gym, and especially this is about working on your back, which is the next point there. Working on your back and working on sort of your balanced, sort of these smaller muscles that aren't what they call the beach muscles. They're not your pecs or anything. But if you start working on your back, for example, you start standing taller. You can literally, if you're a guy who spends a lot of time in front of a computer, you can literally get an inch taller by exercising your back and by straightening out your posture. I can't tell you how many of my students have bad posture that is in part caused by, it can be caused by working in front of the computer and slouching. It can be made worse by doing bench presses, especially if you do bench presses a couple of times like when you go to the gym, because that actually like creates a further slouching like this. And when you work out the back, it brings your shoulders back, straightens you out, and makes you taller. And literally half of the students that come to Love Systems Boot Camp have a really serious case of this, and basically half of men in general. Certainly, again, if you work in computers, that's the number one thing. So it's that slouching posture going to a more erect posture. And I apologize.
It's again hard to
show on the camera here.
One thing you should think of, what I usually tell guys, is when you're walking down the streets, the carry yourself confidently thing. Picture like you're a marionette and you got a string coming through the top of your head all the way down to your butt. And that straight line of the string, there should be you should be standing up straight, walking confidently, your shoulders relaxed, not kind of hunched over, looking down at the ground, but your head up high, smile on your face, maybe a positive kind of expression on your face.
Your nose just a bit above the horizon. So even like having your head just a bit above parallel and like actually looking down a little bit to look forward.
Yeah, and me as a short guy, and Chris isn't the tallest dude either, it actually creates the perception that you're not as short as you are. Not only will you actually be probably an inch taller just by the fact that you got your spine straightened and your head up high, but you'll also give the impression that even if someone, let's say, is an inch or two taller than you, you can give the impression of looking down at them. And this is something I'll get into maybe a bit later, like Marilyn Monroe and Phil Lynott and Jim Morrison and stuff, and all these sort of sex symbols used in photography to give that impression. Even though the camera was right in front of them, they tilt their head up a little bit and they have these sort of eyes that kind of look at them, and it gives you the impression of looking down at you.
And I'm trying to do it now.
Yeah, it's hard to do to a little camera in a computer, but it's something that's really, really powerful. And I'm going to talk more about this when I talk about in my next module when I talk about eye contact. But essentially, if you can walk down the street and when you see a pretty girl walk by you, you look at her and hold eye contact, and you walk with that sort of with the relaxed posture, but also standing up straight and with the looking down at them kind of thing. Man, you get so many more looks than you'd think you'd get. Even me, being a pretty average-looking dude, can get eyes all the time from that. So if you are, slightly above average or even below average, you're going to see some positive responses from that. So I do recommend doing that. Just start walking around now as if you own the place. As if you're, don't ever get caught in your head. Always try to have that perception when you're walking around that at any minute, any moment, you could be, meet someone that would see you, and try to have that great first impression. Chris mentioned focusing on back exercises. I mean, definitely go and get into like an exercise regimen that's more than just, hey, Derek and Chris told me to focus on back exercises, so I'm going to go to the gym and work my back 4 hours a day for 6 months. You mess yourself up. But a focus, at least if you want to fix your posture, on back exercises. Cardio, obviously, really good too.
Don't ignore them. Guys ignore back exercises big time because everybody wants the big pecs.
Yeah,
when they go to the gym, they want the big pecs. And the problem is, if you just do that, first of all, you don't usually get the big pecs if you just go into the gym occasionally. And you get the bad posture. You get the bad posture where you're doing this. And it doesn't help. The back exercises actually straighten you up and are a quicker fix for the average guy.
The last point on this, I'll just go back to the slides at this point now, is that diet is important. And again, I mean, I'm not going to get into the kinds of diets you guys should be looking into. They're going to be different depending on what you want to get anyway, but it is very important. If anyone that is involved in fitness will tell you, it's you can't just do the exercise regimen. The diet is just as, if not much more important than the actual exercises themselves. Excuse me. And definitely look into that as well. If you are looking at trying to get into really good shape or lose a lot of weight, you need to focus on that just as much, if not more. So again, if this is something that you need to do, definitely look into that. Start eating all that grilled chicken and broccoli and brown rice, which tends to be the diet, and egg whites of most of the guys that I know that are really into fitness. All right, let's keep going. Okay, so another quote here. Acting isn't something you do. Instead of doing it, it occurs. If you're going to start with logic, you might as well give up. You can have conscious preparation, but you have unconscious results. This is Lee Strasberg. He is someone that, I mean, he's one of the guys that has essentially invented method acting. And the reason why I put this quote up is because if you replace acting with, I guess, maybe game or being in state, essentially, it is probably the most powerful statement you could say about that. It's not something you do. It's just something that occurs. It has to do with, my modules, several modules back now, about left brain versus right brain. I'm going to get into a subtext here is the topic, and the reason why I wanted to use this quote. Again, I studied acting. I was, I guess you could say, a method actor, although I'm certainly, I'm not really done enough acting to, you'd probably even say I'm an actor, but I did study method acting, and I did have a theater teachers and film acting teachers that would advocated the method acting approach. And Lee Strasberg is someone that is, he basically one of the guys that invented method acting, along with a couple other guys. It's something that I think there is some correlation to charisma and game that I think you guys can take a lot out of, which is why I wanted to talk about it. So let's get into this subtext. So yeah, I put a picture of, we got Bobby De Niro here on the left from Taxi Driver. He's probably one of the better examples of method actors, although there's certainly quite a few. I'll get into a bit more about method acting here a little bit later, but for now, the reason why I put this, again, by the way, notice his body language. In Taxi Driver, he plays a character that, again, a very kind of sinister, aggressive, kind of creepy kind of character. And what do you see with his shoulders? He's not doing a 45-degree angle, right? So just another little example of that I put in there. Okay, so what is subtext? So if those of you who don't know, subtext is the underlying meaning behind the spoken word. So what that means is essentially you can say something, but what you're really communicating is the subtext. And that's way more important than the actual words you're using. By the way, sorry if you guys hear a vacuum cleaner. It looks like they're vacuuming the office right by me here, so sorry if you guys hear that. Anyway, very, very important. Subtext, if you're acting anyway, you need subtext. You cannot act without subtext. But in terms of like charisma, it's also extremely important because it's about literally what it comes down to. I think this might be one of the next things. Okay, never mind. It's what you're thinking. I'll get into this a bit later. But yeah, it's the underlying meaning behind the spoken word. If you've got a scene, let's say John and Mary are in a scene and they're in a bedroom and they're both sitting on the bed, and John looks at Mary and says, "Mary, I just want you to know that I love you." Okay, so that's the words written on a script. But what does it actually mean? Well, those words themselves don't actually mean much. Now, you may be thinking, well, yeah, they do. He just said that he loves her. Yeah, he did. But what that actual sentence means is entirely up to the subtext. For instance, what if they're brother and sister and their mom just died? Okay, it means something. What if, what if she's a girl that's been obsessed with him since they were kids and they just had sex for the first time? And she's, a bit self-conscious. Okay, it means something else. What they just watched their parents and they something happened and their kid died or something. The sentence means something very different depending on, I guess, the context, which would dictate the subtext. So the reason why I bring this up is because this is really, really, really important when you're talking to women, because to be honest, whatever you're thinking in your head is what you're communicating, which I'll get into a bit later. But let's go to the next point. Okay, so experiments with subtext. So again, I mentioned I was coming into this as an actor. I started noticing this, that women were picking up on my subtext. And my subtext, to be honest, when I first started was, I hope I don't get blown out. I hope these girls like me. I hope they don't know I'm using a line. I hope that I can talk to them for more than a minute without creeping them out. And so because those are all the thoughts that I had in my head, that's what my subtext was. My subtext was, I'm scared out of my mind right now, and I hope that you don't notice, and I hope that you'll be nice to me. And because that was my subtext, I creeped most of the women that I talked to out. They would get that vibe from me, and they'd be like, yeah, cool. They'd answer my question, and they'd go away. Or they'd say, we're kind of having a drink, or, we're talking, see you later. And it didn't, work. So I started applying some of my acting background into it. I thought, okay, well, I think they're probably doing this because my subtext is shitty. What if by the way, I don't recommend using acting as a way to sort of get around your lack of charisma. I think that's a really poor way of doing it. But I will communicate my experiments so you guys can understand how subtext works and sort of the power of it. Because I have an acting background, I started using subtext. So I started thinking, okay, well, what are some beliefs I can have coming into this conversation, or starting this conversation that will make this go a little bit better. So I thought, okay, well, one would be, what if I believe what I'm saying? So if I'm asking women, let's say I was using some lame sort of opener as a way to talk to them, and it was something like, hey, what do you guys think about mustaches? I'd think to myself, well, what if me and my friends are growing mustaches, and I'm trying to figure out what would be a good mustache to grow? I could ask them because I'm curious, and that would be the right subtext, I guess, that would make them answer the question. So I do that. So I'd go up and I say, hey, what do you guys think about mustaches? Like, what do you? And they'd talk, and I'd be like, all right, what do you like? What kind of mustache do you think I should grow? Because I'm growing one for November. And they would believe me. They would believe that the reason I was asking them is because I'm growing a mustache, and my friends are, and they'd answer. They'd get that subtext, and they'd answer in that way. But it wouldn't go anywhere. Like I'd get to the first minute, and then I'd have nothing left to say, and then I'd the fear would come back, and I'd get insecure, and then it was the same experience. But I did notice that I got through that first part. So I thought, well, that's very interesting. Subtext seems to work here. So I started experimenting with it some more, and I started thinking, what is the time in my life where I'm the most attractive to women? And I kind of pinpointed it. To me, it was just after I had sex with them. Just after I had sex, let's say I was in the bed and I was kind of laying with the girl, and I didn't need anything or want anything from them at that point. I was very content, they're content. I put my arm around them, and we could just talk as two kind of human beings that were just interested in having a conversation and getting to know each other. And I thought that was where I was most confident, so I thought, well, how could I come in with that subtext that I just slept with them? And so I would, and this, again, is not a great example of something you should do, but because I had this acting background, I was experimenting with it. And I think to myself, okay, well, let's say this girl that I see over here, let's say I go over to her and talk to her. Hold on here, guys. Okay, you guys just see me so I can, not staring at some words on a page. I think to myself, all right, so there's this girl over here, other side of the bar, and she's really cute. And she's with two of her friends, but what if I go over to her and talk to her, and it goes really well? And I end up charming the pants off her. Not only her, but her friends as well. They love me. And I get her number, and I call her, and we go on a date. We end up dating. And I meet her friends, and this girl's really crazy. She's like really into crazy sexual stuff. So not only are we going wild on the sack, but we introduce her friends into it. We're having threesomes and foursomes with their friends. And we're having sex all the time, and all their friends love me, and it's great. And then what if I get in a time machine, and I go back to this moment right now where I first met her, and I have to go up to her and talk to her and communicate to her that all this stuff already happened without actually saying it. And so this is what I would do. I'd go up to girls with that idea in my head, and I'd go up and I'd say, hey, how's it going, guys? And there'd be this sparkle in my eye, this look that said, you already know me, and we've already slept together, but I know you don't remember that, but I remember that, and that's gonna make me feel invincible because I know you're gonna be attracted to me because I already know that I got you. And I would communicate that to them in my subtext. So we'd have a normal conversation. I'd just start talking to them and say, what do you guys have tonight? And they would sense something. They would sense it, and I could see it right away. Their eyes would kind of look at me as if they were seeing something that I wasn't saying. And the other girls would kind of look at me, and they'd kind of smile, and they'd look at each other. And eventually, every single time I did this, they'd stop, and they'd say, have we met you before? You seem really familiar. And the other girls would chime in, too, and they'd say, yeah, I know. You seem like you have this really, we met you before. And the idea behind this is not that they could read my mind and, I'm from the future and I slept with them. The idea behind this is that I was giving off the subtext of familiarity. And that was the emotion that I was communicating. And they were picking up on it. And they didn't know why. They didn't know why I was giving that vibe off, but that's what I was giving off, and so that's why they brought it up. So this is the power of subtext. I'm going to get into this more, like I said, in one of the next modules, but the idea behind this is that whatever you're thinking and feeling when you say what you say is actually what you're communicating with women. I think I talked in one of the first modules of the whole emotion versus logic thing. This is where it really comes into play. So if you've been experimenting with this and you've been thinking about this is sort of where it really, really, really becomes very useful. Now, I don't recommend using acting and stuff like I already said 3 times, but having a control over your emotion is going to definitely be super, super important. So, which I think is actually the next point here. So let's get into that. Yeah, there you go. What are you thinking? So what are you thinking and control your emotions? So this is what I just talked about. So literally, whatever you're thinking is what you're communicating, and then control your emotion. All the guys that are the best at this, the guys that I've seen that have studied this and became literally every single instructor at Love Systems, and every student I've taught that's gotten really good has been able to control their emotion. That is the one thing we look for when it comes to guys that will get very good at this. It's the most important thing you can learn. If you can control your emotion, you got, I'd say 80% of charisma down. That's really 80% of it. And the reason why is because your emotion dictates so much of how you're communicating yourself that if you can get that one part in control, you are already on the road to success. All right, let's get to the last. There we go. All right, Brando. So I mentioned Brando a couple times throughout these modules, constantly saying, oh, we'll get to him later. So this is where I'm going to talk about Brando. Marlon Brando, he's an actor. He's a method actor, which I think okay, I'll get into that. He is I would say, the best example of game and charisma I've ever seen in my life. And believe me, I've done a lot of research and a lot of, I went to film school, so I watched a shitload of obscure movies that, I don't even know if you could even download or find in a video store that have examples of classic guys that are picking up women. And there's nothing really that I've seen outside of recent things where they get it right and that would still be applicable today, except for Brando. If you watch movies from the 50s or the 60s, even the 70s, and you see scenes in which a guy seduces a girl, it seems off. Especially when you get to the 50s and 60s, it just seems really, really off. It's, it's stuff like, well, hey there, princess, how about we go on a date? I buy you a milkshake and get you a bouquet of flowers. And it's like this really old-timey idea of game that, to be honest, and I talked about this in the 6 C's of Confidence when I talked about conviction. That whole thing, there was a time when that, in and of itself, was great, and you could have that sort of that way of going about it. And, there is aspects of that still work today. But when you watch Brando and you watch him in these scenes in the movies, you could take that out and put it in a bar today and it would work just as well. And he's one of those guys that his game is timeless. He has this charisma that it doesn't matter if you were born in, 1910 or 2000, no, I can't say 10, 2001. Maybe, I guess. That's still really young. Never mind. We'll say 1999. What is that? 16, 17? All right, good. But it's timeless. It's one of those things you watch it and even as a dude, a heterosexual dude, I'm like, fuck, man, that is sexy shit. And I really tried to break it down because here's the thing. When you think of Marlon Brando, if you know who he is, I mean, that's awesome. Most actors will say he's the best actor of all time. I agree. He was a method actor. Method acting, by the way, if you're curious, if you don't know what that is, it's essentially a style of acting that says the way to act is to not act. And the idea behind that is that the only way you can really act, you know what, I'm going to go and put myself on camera here to explain this a bit more. The only way to act if you're method acting is to not act. And the idea behind that is that it was a style of acting that came about in the 1940s. Marlon Brando, James Dean were big proponents of it. If you watch movies before 1940, like in the 30s and 20s, really old movies, you'll notice the acting seems a bit off. Even in the 40s and 50s, it still seemed a bit off because method acting hadn't really caught up into mainstream. And it seems really over the top. People are they enunciate a bit different. And that's because all acting came from theater acting. And in theater acting, you need to act towards the back of the audience. So the people in the very back row need to know what's going on. So they don't get little subtle movements that they can get if you have a camera right in front of you. Method acting, the idea behind that was that if you think you're in a scene acting to a camera, you're not acting. If any part of you thinks that you're acting, you're not acting. The only way to act and the only way to get the person watching to believe that you're the character is for you to believe that you're the character. And most actors nowadays are method actors, or at least they advocate a method style. The term has gotten quite convoluted in recent years in the sense that most method actors nowadays wouldn't even say they're method actors. But in those days, it was more about a regular sort of natural form of acting. Anyway, we'll go back to the presentation now. So he has Timeless Game. Now here's where the big mindfuck comes. The idea of Brando versus reality. So what do you mean by that? Early Brando films, if you watch Streetcar Named Desire, On the Waterfront, The Wild One, you will see a similar character. A confident guy that's good with girls, that is very charming. And this was the idea of Brando. In fact, now, it's still a term nowadays when people refer to a classically, like a really good-looking, suave dude, you'd probably compare it to Brando. But the truth is that Brando, in reality, was nothing like the characters that he portrayed. He was a bit of a hermit. He lived alone. He had a bunch of cats. He was super shy. And this is very interesting because when you watch these scenes, and I recommend watching this, if you look up on YouTube, Brando the Wild One, I think the very first clip that comes up is a scene in which he orders a drink from the waitress at a bar. And that's all that happens. It's a 3-minute scene or 3.5-minute scene, and he literally just goes in and orders a beer from the bar. But so much happens in that scene. And Brando got this reputation because he would improvise the scenes, he wouldn't follow a script, and he'd often get the perfect take on the first take. Now, that's a pretty impressive thing. And so they set up really complex camera setups in order to do this. Because he wouldn't even memorize his lines, especially later on. But anyway, the reason I mention this is because I actually saw an interview with him. I'm probably jumping into a couple different... All right, I'm not. I saw an interview with him that it was... I think I read it, actually. And essentially it was that someone interviewing him that was wondering, after they got to talk to him a little bit, they realized that the kind of person that he is, this is very early young Brando too, was very different from these characters that he was playing. And they kind of asked him, how is it that you can play these characters that are so confident, so masculine, so, just doesn't give a shit, so nonchalant, and completely, cool, but in reality, you're this super kind of shy, quiet, almost insecure kind of guy. How do you play these characters so convincingly? And he said something that stuck with me. And what he said was, when I go into a scene, I picture the character that I'm supposed to be and that I am, and I become that character. And I don't think about what I'm going to say. I don't question the way that I'm going to act. I just make sure that everything that I do comes from that belief that I am that character. And that's what he does. And so in this way, and this is the same thing I've heard from not only actors, but painters, athletes, musicians. whenever they're creating their best work, or I guess any work, they say a very similar thing. They say, I'm not creating it, it's literally flowing through me. You know, Michael Jordan says, I know when the ball's going in before it leaves my fingers. You know, any painter, if you look at quotes from painters, they'll often say the same thing. They just say that it flows through them. It's an expression that came out of them that they put onto canvas. And it's the same way with Brando. This is why he's seen as such like an important artist when it comes to the acting as an art, is because that's kind of the way that he took it. So it's this idea of channeling that I thought was so. I have not seen it really in any other actor. There's other actors that do it very well. Like Tom Hardy is a sort of like a modern kind of version of Brando. He does it. Ryan Gosling's very good. There's a couple other actors that kind of have that Brando kind of vibe to them. But none of them I don't think are doing it the same way that Brando was. And it's so often what I do when I'm out, so this is my next point, what would Brando do? So often when I'm in a situation, I try to think, what would Brando do? And I base this, what would Brando do, based on his earlier characters, okay? So Streetcar Brando, On the Waterfront, Wild One Brando. The thing is, that's actually not Brando. What that is whatever Brando was channeling in those films. The problem with Brando is that when you watch his later films, it's almost like he started believing his own bullshit. So the idea of who Brando was started to creep in to who he thought he was. And in his later years, although he was still a brilliant actor and still did very well, this idea that he was this person started becoming his personality. And I think he lost a lot of that magic that he had in his earlier years when there was still, he wasn't like that. So I do recommend watching. In fact, that's part of the homework, which we'll get into later. But often when I'm out, I think, what would Brando do? And I think of, his characters in these scenes, and it literally, I let it wash over me. So I picture his face expression. It's kind of has to do with the state reset that I mentioned in a previous module. I just let his face I make the same face expression, and my body language corrects itself, and I just sort of take that vibe. And still to this day, if you watch like Streetcar Named Desire, man, when that movie came out, by the way, one of his first films, one of his breakout roles, women were fainting in the audience. That he was so it was like literally the sexiest thing anybody had ever seen on anywhere. Women were like fainting in like I said, in the audience. They were screaming. And this is a movie in which he plays an abusive boyfriend that basically beats the shit out of his girlfriend or his wife. It's a really great example of not good game, I guess, but certainly the effect that this sort of stuff can have on women. All right, so homework. I don't think we ended too late here. This is your homework for this week, guys. I want you to practice proper posture always. So this has to do with when you're sitting, when you're walking down the streets, when you're just around your house even. Always try to have proper posture. Exercise and eat right. I do recommend, if you're not already looking into a regimen, getting a diet that you can follow and going through with that. That's going to be super important. Take dancing lessons. This is something I didn't mention on the module, but dancing lessons basically teaches you how to move, especially Latin dancing, because it's a bit less restrictive, a bit more sexualized. It teaches you to be more comfortable with your body. I do recommend taking dancing lessons just as a way to sort of understand your body better and especially get more confident in moving your body. Very, very good. And last is do your homework. Watch Streetcar Named Desire, The Wild One, On the Waterfront, and channel your inner Brando. And that's going to be different for all you guys. And I don't mean to say act like Brando or even try to mimic Brando. I just mean try to channel that inner belief that you are the guy that can attract women and that you're going to attract them, and let that flow through you. Trust it. I swear, I've had situations in which I just had that sort of trust that I let that sort of Brando wash over me, and I had that look on my face. And girls would say things. They'd say, like, let's say a witty kind of barb or remark to me, and I'd reply back instantly because I had that belief that whatever I was going to say was going to be the best possible thing. And I just let the words flow out of my mouth. And I swear, even if I thought for 2 weeks how to write the most perfect response, I wouldn't have thought of something better than what I just said in that moment. And it surprises myself when it happens. But it's that's something that I think has affected me in every aspect of my life. Just trying to channel that inner confidence, and the more you do it, the more you get to know this almost like version of yourself that's you can just turn on, and it's not Brando. It's just this inner sort of. It's almost like you're letting it in, and you just have to trust it that when it takes possession of you, it's a really weird way of explaining it, but it's going to do the right thing, and what you'll find is that it will, and it does. But you have to trust it. You can't overthink it and be logical about it. Going back again to the Lee Strasberg quote that I use, you can't force it. You can't try to logic your way into it. You just have to allow it to come into you. And again, not to get too woo-woo or anything, but I've seen this happen enough times, and I felt it enough times that I know it's a real phenomenon. So anyway, that's your homework. I'm going to open it up for if you guys have questions at this point. Now is the time to ask. All right. So you guys are joking with my haircut. Thanks a lot. Andrew, hi Derek. I'd ask about friendly smiling versus over smiling or supplicating. Any tips on that? So, friendly smiling. I actually don't smile that much, and it's something that people have said. I smirk. I have shit-eating grins, but I don't smile that much. Mostly because for me, smiling seems forced. It's just the way that I am and my own personality. Not to say you shouldn't smile. But I don't really think that having this big like smile that's trying to communicate that you like what they said or you like what's going on is a good thing. I believe in just like having a smirk, having like a sort of self-interested kind of like smile is more powerful. Big beaming smiles I don't think is necessarily the way to go. Unless that's how you feel most comfortable when you smile. If you got a big smile that you just like having that smile out, then yeah, do it if that's the way you feel most comfortable. But I don't, so I don't do that, and that works well for me. Again, I go more the bad boy kind of vibe, and much more sexual and stuff, which I'll get into in my next module. But that works better for me. So again, depends on your own personal style of game, and if you're the guy that likes going more the nice guy, friendly guy kind of vibe, which some instructors that we do it very well. Other guys do the more bad boy kind of thing that I do more sexual, and that works better for them. Yang C. Cajun, how do you sit or position your body with women seated at the bar and the table? So when I sit down, I kind of follow 45-degree angles still, but normally when I'm sitting down at a table, I'm going to be kind of like this, assuming I can lean back, which probably you can't depending on the bar you're at. I don't try to like get close necessarily physically to people that I'm, speaking to. I kind of take up my room and be comfortable and be relaxed and not face women either. A lot of guys will do this thing where they'll sit next to a girl, the girl's sitting in the seat here, and they'll sit kind of like this and like face the girl like, oh wow, yeah. You don't do that until she's doing it to you. So if she's facing you, then yeah, you can face her. And if she's sort of like getting close to you, then yeah, you could get close to her, and you should be leading with that anyway. But don't face the girl until she's facing you is sort of the general rule. Sit. Don't ask if you can sit, by the way. Don't be like, hey guys, can I have a seat? Just sit down and just talk when you're doing it. Bullshit baffles brains. So as long as you talk while you're doing it, you can just sit down, and as long as you keep talking, they're not going to question it. Derek, have you ever gone out alone, and in that situation, what's your body language like when you're just hanging out? That might be a bit of a general question. To be honest, it's the same when I'm in groups. I always try to have this, again, I can't do it here because of the camera and stuff, but I just try to lean. I'm usually doing something. If I'm out alone, I'm talking to people. If I'm not talking to people, I'm at the bar getting a drink, and if I'm not at the bar or talking to people, I'm looking for someone else to talk to, so I'm probably moving around. You never want to be in a situation where you're just standing around looking for the next person to talk to. You shouldn't do that. So I guess that's my answer. Yeah. Ross had said earlier, what the fuck happened to Derek's head? Thanks, Ross. Just got my ears lowered. Got to look a bit professional for you guys. Zishan, do you think that Peter Underwood, the father from... Oh, God. Yes, Zishan. A perfect example of body language. This is the joke I was talking about. There's a Canadian show called Doghouse, which was a kid's show when I was a kid. It's about a cop that dies in a horrific car accident and then turns into a dog, and he can talk, and he goes to his own funeral, and he basically haunts his children through the talking dog, and it's a kid show, and it's really messed up, and it's a joke because I used to watch it, and it's a messed up show. Anyway, Zishan is obviously some inside jokes here, but yes, Zishan, perfect example of body language, of dog body language. Good stuff. Any other questions you guys have? I don't know if you guys, I guess there's a delay here, so I'll wait a little bit. But yeah, in terms of good body language, if you guys want some more examples, Marlon Brando is amazing. Paul Newman, Jack Nicholson, a lot of the people I've already mentioned. Billy Joel, Jim Morrison is someone else that I didn't really talk about too much. He was a guy that I actually looked at for rock stars that I thought was really good because his was so subtle. It wasn't like dancing and being super sexual. It was just more like he used the 45-degree angle a lot. He had this sultry kind of look where his eyes were relaxed. He'd look up. He'd purse his lips. All this stuff that was really emphasizing his sexuality. In fact, he got a lot of it from Marilyn Monroe. If you look at candid pictures of Marilyn Monroe, it looks like a completely different woman compared to photos of her when she knew that she was being photographed. Because she'd do all these things. Purse her lips, relax her eyes, give this sultry sort of look. But you look at her when she's not doing that stuff, it looks very different. Peter said, any tips for holiday parties that you don't know a lot of people at? Yeah, work the room. Introduce yourself to people. Great opportunity. You're at a holiday party. The best icebreaker is that you don't know who they are, right? So you just go up and say, hey, I didn't meet you guys yet. What's your names? I didn't meet you yet. The subtext being, you're a social guy. They're going to be antisocial if they don't talk to you. And then in terms for body language, just be relaxed. If you're holding a drink, hold it down. So instead of being the guy that holds his drink like this all the time and has what's called a beer shield, holding a drink in front of you, just hold it down at your side like this. So your hands around the rim of the glass or the neck of the bottle. And just, it's a small thing, but it actually communicates quite a bit. Ross says, I've been told by instructors that I need to be more stoic, and I tend to be more of a high energy guy with a tendency to bounce around to music and have fun. Any tips on finding a balance? This really has to do with your personality type. I had the problem being I'm very high energy. And the problem for me when I first started was that women thought I was either gay or childish or a dancing monkey, the entertainment for the night. And it's because I was so high energy. Now, I'm a high energy person, so I had to channel that into more of a sexual kind of vibe. So I ended up turning that into like teasing them and playing with them and doing more flirtatious and sexual things with that energy. Ross, I do kind of know Ross a little bit. So we've met several times. So I can tell just by your energy, Ross, that I think you can play the stoic quite well if that is who you are. But if you're not, you're more of a high energy guy. It's not about turning that off. It's about having a bit more restraint with it. Energy is one of those things that guys misinterpret as being, energy is when I'm just sort of throwing energy out. But in a lot of ways, energy can still be the way that you restrain yourself, right? The way that you have, like, for instance, Michael Jackson is a great example of this, for instance. I don't know if anyone would say Michael Jackson is a low energy guy, but when he's singing, he has those moments where he sings like, and you think he's going to hit that high note, but he doesn't. He holds it, and then he holds it and holds it and holds it, and then finally he's like, and he goes like crazy, and he hits that crescendo, and it has much more of an impact because he's been holding it back that whole time. And that's the way that you can have that energy about you. You can still be high energy, but it's how you restrain it. Not in the sense that you're going to dance around like Michael Jackson and sing to them when you're talking to them, but that you only use that energy when it's appropriate and when it's mutually beneficial or entertaining. I'm not sure if that's too cryptic to understand, but again, it's about not just throwing energy out as a way to get people to find you're interesting, but you use that energy at the most opportune moments to get them to understand your personality better than if you just were throwing it out all the time, if that makes sense. Ranveer says, Peter, I watched a talk by Daniel Rossetti, and he had a really cool line for meeting with people. It was something like, hey, my name's blank. I haven't met you yet. How are you? Yeah, same example. Hey, my name's Derek. Nice to meet you. What's your name? The subtext there being, I'm someone that maybe knows everybody else. We used to do this in really high-end bars when we were in New York and LA and stuff. The best opener to use was, hey, I haven't met you yet. What's your name? Because that implies you know everybody else. Which in a place like New York, in an upscale bar, or LA, says a lot more than it does in other places. Because everyone in those places wants to meet the people that know everyone else, right? So that works really well. Wynn says, what do I do if a girl likes me but is afraid to show it because her friend also likes me who is standing nearby? Wow, very specific question. What do I do if a girl likes me but is afraid to show it because her friend also likes me who is standing nearby? You have to be the one that leads. So you got to make a clear signal. And the one that you make the signal to is going to be the one that, in the eyes of her and her friend, is the one that won. And there may be a bit of jealousy. I would never turn a situation like that into, I'm going to hit on both of them and see which one I get. That is a really easy way to lose both. But if a girl likes you, you think her friend likes you too, you just flirt with the one you like, see how it goes. And hopefully, that her friend will tell her that, Drew said, or get them both. Yeah, you can do that too. And that's the risk you take. When you try to get them both, you might get none. So the risk is up to you. If you think you can get them both, and again, that's like, I like both you guys. You guys are awesome. You guys are my new best friends. And flirting with both of them can be a viable option. Cool. All right, guys. So that was today's module. I had a lot of fun with you guys. Zishan asked another question. How do you approach a group of people sitting at a table in terms of body language? It's a tough one. I always try to position myself near the girl that I like, and I'll usually introduce myself to the whole table at first. I might go up and say, hey guys, you guys just look like a really interesting group, but her right there, she's really cute. So I just wanted to come say hi and introduce myself. My name's Derek. Nice to meet you. I'm totally putting you on the spot right now, aren't I? Guys, I'm probably really embarrassing her. I'm just going to sit down and talk to her a little bit. You guys carry on your conversation. We'll just talk. How's it going? Sorry about that. That's the only way I could come up without your friends immediately making me, telling me to buzz off. Something like that. So you're addressing the group, get them on your side, and then you just talk to her. And they'll respect that, normally, unless her boyfriend's sitting beside her, in which case he'll probably make himself known pretty quick, in which case you're like, oh, shit, sorry, dude. She's like the hottest girl in here. Respect. You're a lucky dude, but I'll leave you guys to it. And you leave. Mr. Steal Your Girl, that's right. All right, guys, I had a great time tonight. I hope you guys get a lot out of this one. Please do your homework. Keep posting in the Facebook group, and we will see you guys on Monday next week for the next module. Thanks again, guys. All right, see you later.